your thoughts on Alexander Dugin.
He's being proven right. I mean, that I remember it was way back when, like in the early 2000s, that he was really talking about a multipolar world. And he's saying that Russia needs to actually turn away from Europe. And at that time, in the early 2000s, even under Putin, there was a fixation on Europe, and where there was a real attempt to become kind of reintegrate Russia into Europe. And that's where all the elite were looking, and most of the people, the common people, were looking towards Europe. But he wrote that, no, this is, we need to make ourselves allies of China, India, Iran. And back then, I remember actually like hearing from not a Russian, but somebody who's lived quite a long time in Russia and came from, was a citizen of Kazakhstan. He was just saying that, that's we can't accept that, or the Russians can't accept that, because again, this was back in the 2000s, and there was a real focus on Islamic terrorism. What is he doing talking about actually allying himself with Muslims? Again, he was pointing particularly to Iran. Now, of course, Iran is really, in spite of what the Israelis and the Americans say, really has not been a sponsor of terrorism. But that's the view that a lot of people have, and apparently, a fair number of people in Russia that are very cautious about it. And again, they say our future's in Europe. But now look where we are, and it just seems like he was prescient. I mean, he really prophetic even. Can say that, he saw the world that was coming. And I know that, even Putin, sometimes they've described him as Putin's philosopher, but actually Putin has never, or certainly in the past, never took much of an interest in him. And clearly disagreed with him. But now it's just, he seems to be, he is, I think he is being taken much more seriously within Russia and elsewhere. I don't know if he actually has any influence on the Kremlin, but in general, people who had written him off as sort of a fringe figure now look at him and say, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Now, occasionally he says things that are, maybe taken out of context, but do come off as maybe a little bit as extreme as supportive of mass violence. Let's put it that way. That like recently, when the Israelis conducted a decapitation strikes on Lebanon, he said, well, he's no fan of Israel, but he says, but we have to admire the Israelis for what they did. Now, I have trouble with that. I just, maybe he was trying to make some sort of point, just showing a resolution, because he has been critical, for example, and I think with some cause, of the very restrained way in which the Russians have conducted, the SMO. That he felt like the Russians should have gone in earlier and with much more force, and he actually very well may be right about that. But sometimes he seems a little bit, to me, I've heard these various comments from him, maybe again taken out of context, but I find a little bit disturbing. Yeah, but just looking at his overall vision, it just seems like, he's proved himself to be a very insightful, even prophetic, figure.
When he made those comments about, Russia maybe being too restrained in its approach with Ukraine, he was making these for a long time, ever since the beginning? Okay.
Right, probably ever since 2014. Again, not only Dugin, but quite a few people. Of course, his daughter was assassinated.
I was going to bring that up. Daria Dugin, I know.
Right.
I was wondering if that changed his outlook on the world.
No, that preceded it. So he was always favoring. Now, it must be said that Putin himself said that he made a mistake to believe in the West and Ukraine, over the Minsk Accords. It was a mistake. And he, at that time, Ukraine hadn't built up all those fortifications. They didn't have the military power that they have now. Of course, Russia was weaker, but still relatively it was much stronger than Ukraine. And if they had gone in with force, because even just these Donbas militias, with some support from Russia, but not any heavy involvement, obvious involvement from Russia, but these Donbas militias were defeating the Ukrainian army. And if the Russians had moved in, it probably could take a lot of this territory at minimal cost. And you just think about it, like these cities are being destroyed, this whole generation of men or generations of men in Ukraine are being killed or maimed. It's just, that could have all been avoided. Now, it's easy to say, of course, it's in retrospect. And Putin was trying to just negotiate a settlement. He was, peace was his goal, avoiding, future conflict in Ukraine. But it failed, and many of the nationalists in Russia, including Dugin, were critical of him at that time. And they're largely supportive of the man, but they were critical. They felt like he had made a mistake then. He shouldn't have trusted the West. And Putin himself has admitted that, they were right about that. He shouldn't have trusted them. Now, there are other things I'm sure that Putin had to consider. One thing, it's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but it's not just about military power. It's also economics. What if the sanctions from hell had been imposed on Russia right back then? Russia may not have been ready for it. I think that they had prepared, when they realized that this could happen. When it happened, they were ready, as we can see. I mean, they were, suffered remarkably little damage, but that's because they had years to prepare. And back in 2015, they hadn't made those preparations. And then Putin also has to consider his relations with other countries. That if he had gone in at that time, he may have lost the support of China and other countries that are very, very important to Russia. But by trying to work through this diplomatically, like through the Minsk Accords and then the Istanbul Agreement, he demonstrated to his partners, if nothing else, that, yeah, we really tried, but look, we failed. So in the end, war was the only option. So anyway, this is, I think some of the criticisms like Dugin and others leveled against Putin were correct, but it's maybe you're looking at the bigger picture. It's not entirely clear what Putin should have done.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please check out my website, nobliski.io. You can look at the pinned comment below. It's something that I think you'll find useful. Even my dad uses it. My wife uses it. Instead of Googling things, you should be using this website because you get access to OpenAI, Perplexity, Anthropic, DeepSeek. There's hundreds of models that you can use. It's what I use to create the thumbnail images, things like this. And the greatest thing about it is there's no rate limits. There are no subscription fees. It's free to try out and use. You get free tokens every day. So if you're not a heavy AI user, you will never have to pay for anything. But this is really my passion project. I really want to get it off the ground, and I think you guys would like it. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you have time to download the apps and give it 5 stars, that'd mean a lot to me as well. Thanks a lot.